The cold came down like a fist that evening, sharp, mean, and fast swallowing the last scraps of daylight over Broken Mesa Valley. Elias Warren sat still on his horse, breath clouding in front of his weathered face, one hand resting on the reins while the other hung loose at his side. He had been heading home after checking the fence line near the north pasture when something made him stop. Not a sound exactly. More like the absence of one. A wrongness in the air that made the hair on his neck stand up. He squinted through the fading light and saw her. A woman, small and hunched against the wind, dragging a plank of wood that looked twice her size. She pulled it inch by painful inch across the frozen ground, her boots slipping on ice-slicked dirt, her breath coming out in ragged puffs. Behind her stood what might have been a shelter, once a crooked skeleton of wood leaning sideways like a drunk man trying to stand. The old trapper's cabin, or what remained of it, sat 20 yards beyond, half collapsed and rotting. No smoke rose from its chimney. No warmth waited inside those broken walls. Elias's jaw tightened. He knew that cabin. Everyone in the valley knew it. Nobody went near it anymore. Not since old Harper died 3 winters back. The roof had caved in. The door hung sideways on one hinge. And the whole place smelled like death and damp wood. Yet here she was, this stranger, trying to build something out of nothing while the temperature dropped low enough to kill. She dropped the plank with a crack that echoed across the empty land. Her shoulders sagged forward, and for a moment Elias thought she might fall. But she didn't. She pressed her hands against her knees, sucked in air like she was drowning, then turned and trudged back toward a pile of scrap lumber near the riverbank. Her coat, if you could even call it that, was too thin for this weather. Just a worn gray thing that flapped open with every gust of wind. No gloves on her hands, no hat covering her dark hair, which whipped around her face like angry ghosts. Elias felt something twist in his chest. He told himself to ride on. Told himself it wasn't his business what some fool woman did out here in the middle of nowhere. He had his own problems, his own ghosts waiting back at the house. Sarah's empty chair by the fireplace, her clothes still hanging in the closet because he couldn't bear to touch them, her voice still echoing in the rooms late at night when the silence got too heavy. But he didn't move. The woman reached the lumber pile and grabbed another plank, this one even longer than the first. She tried to lift it, got one end off the ground, then lost her grip. The wood crashed down, missing her foot by inches. She stumbled backward, caught herself, and Elias saw her face clearly for the first time. Young. Maybe 25, maybe 30, hard to tell, with that kind of exhaustion carved into someone's features. Her skin looked pale as milk, her lips cracked and bloodless. But her eyes, even from this distance, he could see the fire in them, the stubborn, desperate kind of fire that burned in people who had nothing left to lose. She bent down again, wrapped both arms around the plank, and hauled it upward with a sound that was half grunt, half sob. Every step she took looked like it might be her last, but she kept going, dragging that wood toward her pathetic frame, leaving a trail in the frost behind her. The wind picked up, howling through the valley like something alive and angry. It tore at her coat, whipped her hair across her face, and sent the loose planks near the riverbank clattering against each other. The temperature was dropping fast now. Elias could feel it through his heavy coat, through his worn leather gloves. By nightfall, it would be cold enough to freeze a man solid if he wasn't careful. And she was out here with nothing but determination and a pile of rotten wood. His horse shifted beneath him, restless and ready to move. Elias's hand tightened on the reins. He should leave. He should turn around and ride back to his empty house and let this woman make her own mistakes. People came and went from the valley all the time. Drifters, dreamers, fools who thought they could tame this land and learned too late that it didn't bend for anyone. But something held him there. Maybe it was the way she moved. Like every muscle in her body hurt, but she refused to stop. Maybe it was the trembling in her hands when she tried to lift another plank, the way her fingers couldn't quite grip the wood anymore because they were too cold, too numb, or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe it was just the look on her face when she finally managed to prop one piece of wood against another and step back to see if it would hold. Not hope exactly, more like defiance, like she was daring the world to knock her down one more time. Elias knew that look. He had worn it himself once, a long time ago. The frame wobbled, tilted, then collapsed sideways, with a crash that seemed to suck all the sound out of the valley. The woman stood there, staring at the fallen wood, her chest heaving. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then, slowly, she sank to her knees in the frozen dirt. That was when Elias spurred his horse forward. The horse's hooves crunched through the frost as Elias closed the distance between himself and the collapsed frame. He pulled up about 10 feet away, close enough to see the tremor in her shoulders, far enough that she wouldn't bolt like a frightened deer. From here, he could study what she had been trying to build, and the sight made his stomach drop. The boards were warped so badly they curved like bent spines. Most of them had splits running down their centers, wood so rotten it would crumble under a strong wind. She had maybe a dozen nails scattered in the dirt beside her, rusty things that looked like they had been scavenged from the collapsed cabin. The frame itself leaned at an angle that defied basic sense, posts driven into frozen ground too shallow to hold anything upright. It was the kind of work someone did when they had never built anything in their life but were too desperate to care about doing it right. Elias had heard the rumors in town. A stranger woman walking the valley roads alone, asking about work, about land, about anywhere she could go. The general store owner mentioned her 2 weeks back, said she looked half-starved, and talked with an accent from somewhere back east. People whispered that she was running from something or running towards something that didn't exist. Either way, nobody offered help. That was how it went in Broken Mesa Valley. You minded your business and let others mind theirs. He stared at the wreckage in front of him and felt the familiar weight settling on his chest. The same weight that had been there since Sarah died. The same heaviness that made every morning feel like climbing a mountain with stones tied to his ankles. For 3 years, he had wrapped himself in silence like a blanket, keeping the world at arm's length because it was easier than feeling anything at all. The ranch ran itself mostly. His foreman Hale handled the hard decisions. Elias just went through the motions, existing but not really living. Helping this woman would stir talk. He knew that without question. People would say he was moving on too fast, disrespecting Sarah's memory, bringing scandal to his door. The church ladies would cluck their tongues. The men at the saloon would make jokes. His late wife's sister would probably show up on his porch with accusations in her eyes. But if he turned away now, he would be riding past a grave in 2 days. Maybe less. The storm coming tonight would drop the temperature low enough to freeze water solid in minutes. This woman had no shelter, no fire, no chance. Elias yanked the reins and turned his horse back toward home. The ride to his ranch took 20 minutes through gathering darkness. By the time he reached the main house, full night had fallen and stars pricked holes in the black sky above. He didn't go inside. Instead, he walked straight to the tool shed behind the barn, the one he hadn't opened in months because everything inside reminded him of plans that died with Sarah. He pushed the door open and lamplight fell across stacks of unused lumber, solid pine boards from the barn expansion they had planned together. She wanted more room for horses, said the valley would grow, and they needed to be ready. He had ordered the wood, cut some of it to size, then stopped when the fever took her. The boards sat there ever since, gathering dust and accusation. Elias pulled them out one by one, good straight pine with no rot, no warping. He grabbed a box of proper nails, his carpenter's mallet, the level he used when he still cared about building things that lasted. Then he went to the house and collected blankets, a lantern, dried meat wrapped in cloth, a jar of preserved vegetables from the cellar. He was loading everything onto his work wagon when Hale appeared from the bunkhouse, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, even in the dark. "About time you stepped toward living again," Hale said quietly. Elias didn't answer. He just climbed onto the wagon seat and snapped the reins. Dawn came cold and pink over the valley. Elias arrived at the old trapper's cabin to find the woman curled against the riverbank, wrapped in that pathetic coat, shivering so hard her teeth chattered loud enough to hear from 20 feet away. She jerked awake at the sound of hoofbeats, eyes going wide and wild. Her hand shot to something in her coat pocket, maybe a knife, maybe nothing, and she looked ready to run. Elias stopped the wagon several yards away and climbed down slowly, keeping his hands where she could see them. "This storm won't spare anyone," he said, his voice rough from disuse. She stared at him like he might be a dream or a trap. Pride burned in her eyes, fierce and stubborn, the same pride that had kept her dragging those useless boards yesterday. But her fingers were turning black at the tips, frostbite creeping into flesh that had been cold too long. "Why?" she finally whispered. "Because I've got the materials, and you need shelter. Simple as that." She looked at the lumber in his wagon, at the blankets, at his weathered face. Something shifted in her expression. Not trust exactly. More like the exhausted acceptance of someone who had run out of options. "All right," she said. They worked through the morning cold without much talking. Elias cut beams to proper length while she held posts steady despite arms that shook with effort. He showed her how to align a frame so it stood square and true. She learned fast, watching his hands and copying the movements, asking questions only when she really needed to know something. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who understood that sometimes work said more than words ever could. He noticed small things, how she bit her lip when concentrating, how she never complained even when her fingers must have hurt like fire, how she measured twice before making any cut because she didn't want to waste his materials. By midday, they had the basic frame standing solid and square. Elias stepped back to check his work and found himself noticing that his chest didn't feel quite as heavy. The woman he still didn't know her name wiped sweat from her forehead despite the cold and allowed herself a small smile. "Thank you," she said. "Got a name?" he asked. Clara Dune. Elias Warren. "This is my land you're on." She stiffened, that fear flashing back into her eyes. "I didn't know. I can move." "Didn't say you had to leave. Just stating fact." They ate dried meat and hard bread while sitting on stumps near the worksite. Clara's hands still trembled when she tried to hold the food. So Elias poured hot coffee from his thermos and made her drink it first. Color slowly returned to her face. "I came west to marry a man," she said suddenly, staring at the coffee like it held answers. "He wrote letters for 6 months. Said he had work and a home waiting. Said he needed a wife to help build a life." She laughed, but it was a bitter sound. "Found out he married someone else 2 weeks before I arrived. Spent my last coins getting to this valley." Elias said nothing for a moment. Then, "Some men build hope with lies, others build with their hands." Clara looked at him then, really looked, and he saw understanding pass between them. They were both people who had been broken by the world and were trying to piece themselves back together with whatever scraps they could find.